I believe that everybody has a story, and I'm fascinated to hear them. So come with me as we take a walk down Fascination Street.
Welcome back, Streetwalkers. Well, I did it, folks. I finally got the last remaining host of the Nooner podcast. Previously, I have had on this show John Piricello and Bill Watterson. Both are former co-hosts of the Nooner podcast. And the current host lineup is Marty Yu, Stephen Cougar, Cassandra Cardenas, and John Sylvain. Marty, Stephen, and Cassandra have all been guests on Fascination Street podcast, and now John Sylvain has as well. In this episode, we talk about what led John to go to Yale, and then we talk about his time in Seattle, where he started a theater, and then on into the reasons that he went to Los Angeles, some of his time starting up the Sacred Fool Theater Company, and then we really talk about his newest creation, You Know It, the Game. You've heard ads for You Know It, the Game on this show, and you're going to hear one in this episode too. I love this game so much. We talk about how he created it, why he created it, and where you can get it. Also, I'm giving a couple of those games away, so listen and pay attention to how you can win one. This was recorded during all the self-distancing due to the coronavirus outbreak. So if that is over by now, woohoo. If not, damn it. But either way, this is my conversation with John Sylvain.
Yeah, talk to me, yeah.
Welcome to Fascination Street Podcast, John Sylvain. How you doing today, John?
Great, Steve. Thanks. Thanks for asking me to do this.
Absolutely. This has been a long time in the making.
Yeah.
So, John, what I like to do is I like to start off with, kind of where people are born and raised. So tell us, where are you from, man? Where were you born? Where are you raised?
Well, I was born in Framingham, Massachusetts, and we moved around quite a bit. My father was a salesman, so I spent a couple of years as a youngster in Massachusetts, southeastern Massachusetts, but I don't remember it very well. And then around kindergarten, we moved up to Hampton, New Hampshire. I lived in Hampton on and off. We moved out to another town called Kingston. So I grew up in New Hampshire for the most part.
Sweet. Do you come from generations of New Hampshireans?
No, my family's mostly from Maine. My parents grew up in Maine, and their parents grew up in Maine, and my grandmother's from New York. A strange thing about our family, my brother's done our genealogy going back to Charlemagne, and before that, Charlemagne was in the 800s. If you think of every generation as about 20 years, there's 40 generations to go back to Charlemagne. So the fact that we're related to Charlemagne isn't really remarkable, because when you take 2 to the 40th power, it's over 1 trillion. And that's more people than have ever lived on Earth. If you go back great 40 times, which isn't even 2,000 years, you have more ancestors than have ever lived. So we all kind of are our own cousins in some degree. My point being that it's not that unusual that, I would have a relative that was famous king. But anyway, I do. But the interesting thing that my brother pointed out recently was that if you go back in our family tree, almost everybody in our family tree was multiple generations of American or people living in North America. My grandmother on my father's side immigrated from Canada in a canoe back at the turn of the last century, around then.
Any particular place in Canada? Canada's a big place, man.
Yeah, from Quebec.
Oh, Quebec. Sorry. I apologize.
No, it's okay. From the St. Lawrence River. From the middle of nowhere in Quebec to the middle of nowhere in Maine is her journey.
That's nuts.
At the age of 5 in a canoe. And then my grandfather, his brother, they lived in Quebec across the St. Lawrence. I think it's the St. Lawrence. It might have been another river. St. John River, I think that's it. The boundary of Canada and the United States out in the middle of nowhere. They cut down trees for a living. And so my grandfather, my Pepe, fell in love with my Meme's sister, but his brother was also in love with her. So his brother married her. And so Pepe married Eliza. So my father had double cousins because his uncle married his mother's sister. So, there are all these people that were related to different, same things. They had these double cousins.
You sure you're not from Arkansas?
Yeah, I know. But if you go back, all those people in Quebec that were basically poor immigrants into the United States, 100 years ago, they had been living in Quebec forever, like from the 1600s, like all of them. They all looked around. Whenever they got married to anybody, they said, it was almost like everybody said, how long have you been here? At least 100 years. So all those people, the French people, were, in the country since the 1600s. And then my grandfather on my mother's side has people going back to the Mayflower. And my grandmother on my mother's side was from Brooklyn, and her roots go back to the Dutch who settled Brooklyn. I mean, they were all there forever. And it's kind of interesting because it seems like I should be vastly wealthy because my people have been here forever, but I'm not. It's just this weird coincidence. Because if you look back at anybody's ancestry, there's going to be in some branch, a recent immigrant at some point, but not mine. Like somehow all the people I descended from have been here forever.
Weird. You're a son of the Republic or whatever they say.
Yeah, my mother is and daughters of the American Revolution.
There you
I
go.
got 9 relatives on the Mayflower. The original Sylvain immigrated from France in like 1609.
Wow.
Like that.
Been here for a while.
Yep.
What did you want to be when you grew up?
Well, originally I wanted to be a scientist. I was really into physics. I just loved physics. I was sort of interested in quantum mechanics and so forth when I went to college. But then I got to college and I discovered that just adding another dimension to the math, I was going over the same material I'd learned and mastered in high school. But instead of going X and Y axis, we added the Z axis. And that was enough to confuse me. I also noticed in college that every science course had problem sets that were due every week, whereas the history courses or the English courses or any of those things had 2 papers due. So it was like, okay, so you can work hard all through the entire semester, or you could do 2 papers. I was smart enough to realize that was a lot easier. So I became a film major.
For those listening, when he says college, he went to Yale. Why film?
Well, it was the easiest major, and I really liked movies. I just enjoyed the heck out of all those classes. So that was, really what it was. I really loved it. It was film theory, which I've come to think of as, 95% bullshit. But it was fun. I liked it. And I was doing a lot of theater on the side, and I really wasn't interested in studying theater because I just hadn't heard good things, and I also thought it wasn't as fun.
So you were in theater but not studying theater?
Yeah, I was doing a bunch of productions in the dining halls. At Yale, there's now 14 residential colleges, and it's a really great system because you have something like 5,000 or 6,000 undergraduates, but you're in a residential college, which is basically a dorm that also has a dining hall and other club-like organizations that are centered around that dorm, and it has a courtyard. And so you have this smaller social group of about 400 people. So you have a small community within a large community. That's great. I mean, I think that's wonderful. It gives you an opportunity to sort of create a community within the larger community in various interests. They have that in a number of different schools, but the nice thing about Yale is that it's completely random. You don't have these self-selecting groups like the jock college or the arts college or the whatever, like they have actually at Harvard. One of the many reasons why Yale is much better than Harvard, and Harvard sucks. But that's not something I've been enculturated into. That's just a fact.
Oh, gotcha. Why did you pick Yale?
I picked Yale because it's the best. I did really well on the SATs. I was very good at school, which is one of the reasons why I don't think that being good at school translates necessarily into anything. It doesn't mean anything. It means you're good at school. You know what I mean? And you don't really learn anything at school that's really important for life. And I can say that with impunity because I was really good at school. So I was looking at schools. We went and visited 13 schools, and Yale was my favorite. I think it was the first school we went to that was really big. We went to like a lot of the smaller schools. And it was also in a city, even though New Haven is, well, especially back then, was not a good city. I'm sure it's cuter now. But the thing about New Haven, it has terrible weather. Because of where it is, right on the coast, and there's the Gulf Stream. For some reason, at least when I was there, all 4 years, whenever it snowed, it rained right afterwards. So the entire winter was all slush. And you grew up in Texas, right? Did you grow up in Texas?
Yes, sir. San Antonio.
Yeah. So you don't have any experience with slush.
We have minimal experience with slush, but also I did live in Louisville, Kentucky for a year and a half, and coming from the desert here in San Antonio, Louisville, Kentucky is one of the wettest places I've ever seen. You don't think so because nobody talks about it, but for the year and a half that I lived there, it rained every day except for when it snowed, which was a lot.
Really?
Yeah, the last year that I was there, the first snow of the year was on Halloween, and the last snow of the season was the next May.
What?
Yeah, no shit. Like it snowed in May. Isn't that insane?
Wow. So that sounds like a really bad year.
Yeah, it was rough, man.
You were there for a bad year and a half. Because that's crazy. In New Hampshire, it didn't snow until December, usually.
Yeah, it snowed on Halloween. It was crazy. And nobody believes me, but it rained so much there that my grass had moss growing on it. It was weird.
Yeah, I don't
True
really
story.
believe that.
No, it's true. There was moss growing on the grass. It was on the sides of the trees. It was on the grass. It was the craziest thing I've ever seen.
That's great.
So you went to school, Yale, I think at the same time as previous guests of the show, Marty Yu and Paul Giamatti, right?
Yes,
All right, now.
that's right. Oh, Paul's been on your show?
Yeah, I was waiting for you to catch that. No, he has not been yet, but it will happen one of these days.
Okay.
But Marty has, and everybody loves Marty.
Mm-hmm.
Now, at some point during your stay at Yale, you either founded or co-founded the second oldest improv troupe at Yale, and it's still, as far as I know, it's still going. It was called the Purple Crayon, right?
That's right. Purple Crayon of Yale.
Why?
Why? That's a big question.
Since this is the second oldest improv troupe there, that means that there was already one there. So why did you...
Not really, no. It's the second oldest by like a week.
Oh.
So,
okay.
So I think if it says the second oldest, then the Exit Players might still exist, but they were actually a sketch troupe, number one. Number two, they started, like I said, like a week before we started, or maybe they performed before we did or something like that. The Purple Crayon was founded by Eric Berg, came back and tapped 8 of us who'd been in plays with him. I directed Eric in a production of Woody Allen's 2 plays from Without Feathers, God and Death, which are pretty gosh darn funny. And many of the people who were in that became part of Purple Crayon. They were just funny people that Eric had known. And he had studied with Del Close, sort of the grandfather of improv.
Not sort of.
Well, there's other people, and so he came out and taught us the Herald, which is the long form that Del had been working on for many years, and he kind of perfected in 1985. He got the name for it and as an experimental whatever in the 70s, but he really had honed it down to what he thought was a good form, or mid 80s, and that's what Eric learned. He brought that out to us. We were probably the first and last and only group that ever learned to do a herald without actually seeing anyone else do it before or directly from Del. So we learned how to do the herald, and that was our sort of specialty. So we did games and then we did the herald, and, it continued on from there. And so why did it exist? Well, it existed because Eric said, let's do this. And I remember it very much. It was very funny because we learned how to do improv from Eric. Not only did we never seen a herald before, none of us had ever seen improv before. So he was explaining it to us, sort of pitching it to us in the dining hall. And we were like, so wait. So you just make it up and it works out? So you just you're saying we're going to stand on stage and we're going to speak words and we're just going to create things as we're going? And he's like, yes. And he's trying to describe it. And we're just like, what? Then we did it, and we're like, oh, I'm beginning to understand how this might work. Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, one of my favorite scenes I've ever seen in improv was actually by a Tony Award-winning actor who ended up being part of Cyclical's Jefferson Mays. He's not a household name. He's been on lots of TV shows and so forth, but he's weird as hell. He comes across as nuts. But he's a very, very, very super talented actor. He's done lots of things on stage. one-man shows and stuff like that. And he did this little scene with Amy Schottenstein where he was another fantastic performer who didn't end up becoming a performer. And she was just skating around and he was selling her hot dogs. And the reality of the scene was just, anyway, it's a story that goes nowhere.
Nice.
Hey, Streetwalkers, here's a word from our sponsors.
It is 2140. You are trapped in an underground bunker, built a century ago to protect mankind from the pandemic on the surface. Now ruled by tyrants and their robot army. You are an outcast, an orphan, a scavenger, blind, afraid, and alone. You are Ace, a survivor, and you will try to escape this place known as Subterra. Subscribe to Subterra at iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you download podcasts.
Let's get back into it.
I want to answer your question about really why Yale. So I went on this trip. I visited 13 schools. I really liked Yale. Yale had early admission. I applied early and didn't apply anywhere else because I was so lazy, and I got in. It was the day before Christmas vacation. I hadn't asked any other teachers for recommendations. If I hadn't got into Yale, I probably would have had to take a year off because I didn't have any of my other applications ready.
Wow.
So I got into Yale, and then I decided I'll settle. So I only applied to Yale. And why is that? Because I loved it so much. No, because I'm lazy.
Nice. You don't have to answer this, but who paid for it, you or your parents?
Who paid for it? Mostly scholarships.
Oh, wow. Good job. Well done, sir. So I guess at some point you ended up in Seattle?
Yeah.
How?
So I was going to Yale, and I loved theater. And with Eric, I started the Purple Crayon. And I realized this, after decades, right? That what happened was theater at school, like I've done a lot of theater in high school, but it become sort of disenchanted with that because the drama teacher changed several times while I was there. And then senior year, he was this weirdo who did a terrible job. So I was like, I don't like theater. And then I got to Yale and I met some people who were doing theater, not at the official theater, but sort of making it in the dining hall or in squash courts or things. There was this sort of the Dramat system, which is, like I said, those individual residential colleges. So Timothy Dwight was a residential college, and Timothy Dwight had a Dramat that was led by Nathaniel Kahn, who later was nominated for an Oscar for one of his documentary films. He's a really great filmmaker. He had a really profound idea of theater as this community, right? So I got involved with him, and then he graduated, and I took over the theater, and I worked with Dan Etheridge, who started Nooner Podcast and actually turned over the Dramat to him. And I loved the community that theater created. I loved the Purple Crayon. I loved the Timothy Dwight Dramat. And for me, it took the place of family. It gave me a great community feeling. I had a loving family. I had loving parents, but they didn't like each other. My family kind of got sort of splintered and broken because the grown-ups at the time were having problems. Not because we didn't have any particular abuse, but I was always sort of looking for that family. And I found that in theaters. I remember hearing that Elaine May and
Mike Nichols,
they were the founders, along with Del Close and Ed Asner, of the Compass Players.
Yep.
And so I had heard Mike Nichols say, when you have these people that you start with, and you think you're going to work with them forever, and then your career goes in different places and it doesn't work out. I heard that and I thought, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm going to be working with the people that I've been playing with in college forever. And then graduation came around, and, Eric was going to go off to law school, and these other brilliant people who were the funniest people I knew and I'd ever met. And we did this magical thing together, and they were going to go off and be architects and go to business school, and they're going to have careers and stuff. I was like, what are you talking about? We have magic here. we have to stay together. Right. I was the bassist who's like, what about the band, guys? And so somebody else came along and said, I'm starting a theater in Seattle. I said, yeah, I'm going to do that. And then we went around and talked to everybody we knew, and everybody said, no, I'm going to go and actually have a life. And I was like, what? And so we just kept on asking, and a few people said yes. And so I went off to Seattle. Annex Theater had sort of been started by these group of misfits on Bainbridge Island, which is a ferry ride away from Seattle. It's a bedroom community, basically a suburb of Seattle where you commute by a ferry. So Brian Cole was a fellow film major, and he kind of recruited me to come out to Seattle and help restart this high school theater project that was called Annex. And it was called Annex because it was the annex of the Bainbridge Island Performing Arts Theater. And so I got out there. There was this empty space that used to be a Fred Astaire dance studio on the second floor, right in the middle of downtown. It was a space that hadn't been able to rent out. And I didn't realize this until years later, but I graduated from college in 1987. 1987 was the depths of the worst recession since the Great Depression up until that point. And Seattle, there was a famous story about Seattle, like in 1974 or something. Somebody put up a billboard going south on the 5 that said, last person out of Seattle, please turn out the lights. Because Boeing had laid off hundreds of thousands of people, and Seattle didn't get back to the population it had in like 1975 until 2001.
Really?
Yeah. So it wasn't surprising that when I got there in 87, that there was lots of real estate available.
Sure.
And Seattle had a kind of a strange reputation. It had the most equity theaters per capita in the country. And so as a result, in the late 80s, a lot of theater people went to Seattle, and then they realized that all those parts in all those theaters, the Bathhouse, the Empty Space Theater, the Intiman Theater, were all casting from the University of Washington Drama School class of like 1967 and 68. So you'd see the same, really talented, but the same people, like in all of the roles all around town. So if you moved there in order to get parts, you weren't going to get them. So people moved there, and they started small theaters to have a place to get their yayas out. And Annex Theater was the newest theater in Seattle for about a month, right? So we got that space. We asked the landlords for that Fred Astaire dance studio for free. We thought that was a good place to start for negotiations. We didn't hear from them for about 6 weeks. And on the day before Thanksgiving, 1987, we heard back from them. And they didn't say, okay, that's an interesting negotiation position. You start off at 0 rent, and we'll start off at 500. We'll start negotiations. So we figured we start out at 0. They took that proposal, they put it on the bulletin board and laughed at it. No, they said yes to 0.
Really?
Yep. So we had a space. We had to pay for the utilities and the insurance. So basically our net was $187 a month plus utilities because the insurance was $187. So we opened up on New Year's Eve, 1987 was the first event. The theater is still going strong 33 years later.
Really?
Yep. Still going strong. It's moved a couple of times. It's on Capitol Hill now. Obviously, Seattle is booming like nobody's business and has been for the past 15 years. And so it's been harder and harder because theater relies on cheap real estate as much as anything else.
Right.
It's very difficult to make any money. And theaters is not a way to make money. That's why it's almost all theaters are nonprofit. The only place that theater makes any money is Broadway. And that is a crazy business. That's even crazier than making movies. So we got the space, we moved in, and we had a certain idea of how it was going to go. We thought we'd do our show, and everybody in Seattle would go, oh, my God, finally, there's a new theater. We'll go flock there. And we were 21 years old, all of us, and we were shocked that it didn't just like all work out fantastically well, and we made money hand over fist. The first show was pretty wild, and people showed up, but they didn't show up in great numbers. And there was a whole long story. A lot of things sort of happened, and the original founding members kind of stopped showing up. So the guys who'd known each other in high school kind of like gave up for a few months. And I was left there with a couple of other friends, and we basically reached out to everybody that walked through the door and said, would you like to do some kind of show, please? Our first show opened in like early February, And then we didn't do anything for a month. And then from April then on, we did more theater, just like we did dozens and dozens and dozens of shows. And we invited musicians. Seattle had a teen dance ordinance. And what that meant was, because there was this place in Seattle in the early 80s and late 70s called the Monastery, it was a teen dance club, and all this bad stuff happened. So they passed this law where bands could only play for underage audiences as a benefit for a nonprofit. Well, we were a nonprofit. We had a space. So we were a place where under 21 could go and see bands. And basically, the Seattle grunge scene was just starting in the late 80s. And the only places to play live were the clubs in Pioneer Square, which were all R&B cover band clubs, and the Comet Tavern. That was it. And so we provided a place for Mudhoney, Action Buddy, Nirvana, Mother Love Bone, the Posies. All these bands would play after we did our theater shows. The night that Nirvana played was particularly insane. I was sort of running the door, and, you know, my friends were coming out and saying, "Oh my God, this band is incredible." And I was like, yeah, but I think some kids are sneaking some booze in. Oh my God, I think someone's doing heroin in the bathroom, and we have too many people here. So that was what it was really like to be on the ground floor of a revolution. I was quoted in the Seattle Weekly, like when we first opened, they did a little article on us. And I said, I thought, because I really believed it, I thought that theater was going to be the rock and roll of the 90s. I was very proud of that. Theater's going to be the rock and roll of the 90s in the way that stand-up was the rock and roll of the 80s. Just sort of the place where transgressive and dangerous ideas and communities would be formed around it. Small theater was going to be the rock and roll of the 90s. And the funny thing is that the rock and roll of the 90s happened at Annex Theater, but it turns out that the rock and roll of the 90s was actually rock and roll.
That's funny. So you said there was a lot of theaters right around that time in that area. Mm-hmm. Did all of the theater people, did they all know each other? Did different theater groups know other theater groups? Like, was it a close-knit community?
It wasn't super close-knit, but we did know each other. So there was the Seattle Public Theater, and AHA was another theater, and there was several others. But, you know, honestly, I look back on that, and my attitude, my personal attitude was, oh, yeah, you have a theater. Yeah, but I'm so young. You know, I'm like 21 years old, and you're 30. So I'm much cooler than you are. So there was a sort of an arrogance that I had. And, you know, the thing about theater is it takes up a huge amount of time to actually run your own little theater. I think with other kinds of art, like filmmakers will get together and everybody's working on their film, right? And then you help someone else make their film. And that takes a year or two for you to make your film. And so there's plenty of time for you to help other people make their film. Or if you're an artist, you know, you're painting and you might get together with other people, or you might be a writer, or even nowadays a YouTuber or whatever, all kinds of different things, where it's just a small team of people that are working on projects, and then you meet up with other people. So there's a sense of individual artists creating a community. In theater, it's a collaborative already. You know, we had 100 people at Annex or more, and every single project involves at least 20 people. You know, you have the people on stage, but you have to build a set. You have to hang the lights. You have to have all the rehearsals. So it's like a community in and of itself, which I loved. I mean, that was why I did it. I don't care about theater that makes money. I think that theater in a bigger space loses something. And if you don't have a bigger space, economically, it can't work out. It's all volunteers. So it's not like you can make a living off of the kind of stuff that I like. And that's why I started the theater here in Los Angeles. There's nothing better in the world for creating community. Nothing better in the world for creating a tight-knit community than theater.
I live just outside of San Antonio in a small town called Bernie.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a little community theater. It's been here for God knows how long, but
mm-hmm.
It's about 80 seats, I guess, something like that. So it's fairly small.
Yeah.
And pre-COVID, My wife and I were going to every show. We love that place. It's about a mile and a half from our place, and we love that place. So I agree. It's not only the community aspect of it, but it's just so much fun to go see the person you might see at the grocery store is up on stage doing a play. And I mean, it's just amazing. I have said it before on this show, but I highly recommend once COVID is less of a threat, I think everybody should just flock to their local community theaters. It's so much fun, and it's such a bargain.
Hey, Streetwalkers, here's a word from our sponsors.
Hi, I'm Erica.
And I'm Cassandra.
And we're the hosts of Trashy Trashy.
We're a podcast filled with trashy news stories and garbage people.
Did you leave the scene of an accident to go tanning?
Do you refer to wearing the strap down on your Crocs as sports mode?
Have you ordered Domino's online before they even open in the morning?
Are you switching the same AAA batteries from your TV remote to your vibrator instead of just buying more batteries?
Or are you normal?
Check us out wherever you download podcasts.
Let's get back into it.
Now, I know that you said you met your wife there in Seattle, and you were there for 6 years, and it sounded like you had just an amazing 6 years, chock full of memories and success. Yeah. Why did you go to L.A.? What took you to Los Angeles?
Well, I was really interested in film, and I really wanted to make a movie. And what happened was I was really comfortable at my theater, and I kept on sort of wanting to start doing other things and maybe get involved in making movies. But what would happen like several times was I would have a job at the theater, like maybe I was the house manager. I was the business manager at first, and then the development director for a few years. And then I was the technical director for a year or so. So what would happen is I would say, okay, I'm not going to have any more responsibility. But all of my friends were there. So I would say, I'm not going to do anything. And then somebody would say, would you come and be the house manager for this production? And I'd say, yeah, I'll do that. I've wiped off all of my obligations. So I'll come back and do that. And while I'm there, well, I'll audition for that play. Okay. And then I'll be in this play, and then I'll be the lights for this play. And then, and I'll direct that play. Okay. Now that I've directed that, I'm going to take a step back. And I take a step back for like a month, and then I go, oh yeah, I'll do the house manager. I'll act in that. Oh, I'll do the lights. That happened like 4 times. So I never really had any space. Like every time I had any space, Annex would fill it up. So I felt like I have to leave. So I applied to film school, and my wife applied to film school too. And she got in because she took the application seriously, and I didn't. And so she moved to go to USC, and I was going to stay in Seattle. And we were living together, and she really wanted to have some time away. And so I interpreted that, and it turns out it wasn't her intention, or at least she says now it wasn't her intention. I thought, okay, her last boyfriend, she left the college. She told me, I was afraid of breaking up with him because he was a little weird. So I went from, Whitman to a different college that I didn't enjoy. I went to University of Washington. And I was like, oh, okay. And then a couple of years later, she's like, yeah, I want to move to LA, and I don't think you should come. And I said, oh, okay, I get it. All right. This was one of those things that, you learn later. Well, if you have that kind of question, you should have the conversation. But I didn't want to have the conversation. So she went off to LA. I quit my job eventually and moved, or I didn't move, but I went and worked on a movie as an actor and an assistant director called Hitting the Ground in Maryland. And then I moved to LA. And then I actually got into film school. I got accepted to UCLA like in August. They said, oh, yeah, you want to come in 3 weeks? It's only going to cost you $25,000.
Good God.
I said, huh. Yeah. So I talked to a number of people who had gone to film school, and they all said, no, take that money and make your own movie. It's a waste of time. It's good. You'll make connections, but you already have connections, John. You have me. And, so I was talking to people who like Sean Levy and Jason Blum and Dan Etheridge, and they were like, don't do that.
Yeah, Kevin Smith is a big proponent of that also. He went to a film school, and then he was like, I'm out. Mm-hmm. And then he tells everybody who will sit still long enough to just take that money you were going to spend on film school and make a film.
Yep. And that's even more true now, because it costs $60,000 for 1 year of school now. I made a feature film for $23,000. that's with digital technology 20 years ago.
Right.
And that $23,000, $17,000 of it was feeding the crew. I didn't pay anybody any money. The rest of it was just equipment.
Wow.
Yeah. So I totally agree. Because what I learned from making that movie and for many years is that I'm not a very good film director. I'm a great writer. I'm a really great theater director. I'm a fantastic creator of communities. I've done it all over the place. But visually, I'm not a good visual storyteller. I don't see things when I read them. I don't see them appropriately. You know, and if it'd be a drag if it cost me more than $23,000 of other people's money. You know, I feel bad about that. It was my dad's money. He was a big investor and some other people that they gave me money and I made a movie that wasn't very good. I also learned that there's a reason why you don't make movies about people breaking up.
What is the reason?
It's really unsatisfying and not a compelling story. You tell a story about a couple of people who successfully negotiate their breakup. How many movies have you seen that are like that?
One, it's called The Breakup.
Yeah. And was it good?
It made a lot of money.
Did it? Did it really?
Well, it made more money than yours.
Yeah, exactly. So I made this movie without being a great visual stylist myself, and the cinematographer was a successful cameraman on a couple of mediocre documentaries, and so he wasn't all that great visually, and it really looks like it was directed by a theater artist. But we made it all with digital technology in 98 because we used the very first version of Final Cut. And I was talking to many people were like, well, you have to do it online. I said, you know what? I don't think you do. And you didn't. There are very few people that knew that it was possible to do what I did, which is to make a complete feature digitally without going to any post house. It was one of the very first digital features. I made one of the first digital features. Unfortunately, I didn't go in close enough to people. I didn't use the camera to tell the story. A lot of things that I've learned since then, being a film professor, it would be better now, but it wouldn't be great. And the writer insisted on being in it as the lead. He's a really good actor, but he has a tendency, his eyes are a little bit sunken and a little bit wide. And he has a tendency when he's acting to not blink. And what that translates into on film is he looks like a psycho.
Yeah, I was just picturing that in my mind going, this looks like a crazy person.
Yeah, he ends up being a psycho. And he's the guy who's not happy about the breakup. So you end up with something that's supposed to be about two people successfully sort of breaking up. And it ends up feeling like this guy's a psycho. So people's faces are an important part of the filmmaking process.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I cast this guy because he wrote it and he wanted to be in it and he was going to bring money. He never did, but he was in it and it just didn't work because of the way he looked. You know, that's part of the reason it didn't work. And it didn't work because I'm not a great visual director.
Well, one thing that you are great at, and this I know about you just from knowing you as much as or little as I do. One thing that you're really great at is starting things.
Yeah.
You started or helped start 3 different theater and or improv companies, troupes. You started and followed through with 2 books, at least, as far as I know. Mm-hmm. You even invented a game, a trivia game, mm-hmm. which is one of my favorite things, definitely my favorite thing about you, but it's one of my favorite things just in general that's happened in the last couple of years because that game is so much fun.
Steve, your support has been so great. And I'm so glad you like it. And it's been wonderful the way you've been talking about it. I'm really glad it worked out. I mean, we could talk about how that developed. It's kind of amazing because it doesn't feel like I invented it.
One of the things that I really enjoy about it is that I feel like I get to hear about it when it was in its nascent stages because I would hear you every week. Listeners, Streetwalkers, John Sylvain is 1/4 of the current group of hosts that is on the Nooner podcast, on the Smodcast podcast network. Mm-hmm. You've been doing this for what, like 5 or 6 years?
What, Nooner or you know it?
Nooner.
Nooner, it hasn't been that long. I think it's been 2 years.
There's no way it's been 2 years. Get out of here. For real?
Yeah, it's been 2 years, yeah.
Wow.
It hasn't been that long, yeah.
Boy, do you make the time drag.
I know.
So it was well over a year ago that you talked about this trivia card game that you were trying to develop, and you talked about it on the show, and then a couple of times you would bring in, sort of sample questions and y'all would play around or whatever. And it just seemed so engaging and so much fun that when you finally did do a Kickstarter so that other people could play and enjoy this game, I was over the moon. I did participate in the Kickstarter. I got this really dope-ass box, which is a full-size game with, I don't know, like 288 cards or something like that, a lot of cards. And my name is even on the box, which is super exciting.
Yeah.
But after that, just a few months ago, you did another Kickstarter with a smaller deck, a smaller pack of cards. And that was also a successful Kickstarter. And so this is what I'm going to do, Streetwalkers. The first two people who email me at fascinationstreetpod@gmail.com, just put in the subject line, "You know it!" ! The first two of those that I get, I'm going to send you a copy of this game.
Wow.
It is so much fun. I love this game so much. Now, John, how did you come up with this game and why?
Well, this game has actually been around as an idea since before I made that movie I talked about, which was in 1990. When I first got here, I started doing freelance writing, and a friend of mine got me a job working on Trivial Pursuit, the Millennium Edition, which was going to be a CD-ROM, if you remember those. And then as a result of that, I got a job on Jeopardy Online. The World Wide Web it was the first internet bubble 20 years ago. So I was writing these trivia questions for Trivial Pursuit and then Jeopardy, Sports Jeopardy and Rock and Roll Jeopardy. And we invented Jeopardy 2001, which was a science fiction and technology variant. So I got it in my head that, well, first of all, I loved writing trivia, and I sort of got a sense of what good trivia was. And Jeopardy has this shtick where you got to come up with a question for the answer. And I thought, well, if you want to make a trivia game, you got to have some kind of structure to it. And I came up with this idea of applying that to a movie game, right? Which was, if I say 2 stars, can you tell me what movie it is? Like Meryl Streep and Tom Hanks. Can you name the movie that they're both in?
Oh, the Papers?
Yeah, right. The Post.
All right, The Post. Yeah, there you go. Sorry.
And which is amazing that Meryl Streep and Tom Hanks have only been in one movie together, right?
That is kind of amazing, yeah.
So anyway, I started out with just movies. So that would be this, you have 2 clues and then you have an answer. And then I realized that 2 clues and have an answer, you could apply it to states. What states are adjacent to 2 things? And you could apply it to rivers. What river goes through these 2 countries? Oh, and you can apply it to countries because you could actually expand it to apply it to almost everything. It's really funny that it took me a while to realize that. So I had this idea of 2 clues leading to 1 answer 20 years ago. And I had that in my head, and then I realized it could expand it to all these different things. And then pretty soon I realized, you could expand it to everything. And because it's 2 different clues, you can make it, work for other people. And so I said, okay, so that's one idea. And then I thought, okay, what's the structure of this game? Oh, what if it's really simple? So you don't have to have a board. You don't have to have anything elaborate. You could just have cards, and you could keep track of it by, if you get it right, you win the card. Oh, well, how about if you get it wrong, you keep the card? So you have the questioner goes around in the circle, and you can actually win by having other people get it wrong. And so that was in my head, and I started to, over the years, occasionally sort of revisit this and create these little cards on paper that I would play around with, and I tested out over the years. And I really wanted it to work out, but I felt like if you didn't have cards that were real cards and that looked pretty good, that people wouldn't really play it. And so finally Game Crafter came along, which gave you the ability to publish 1 copy of your game. So I went to Game Crafter and I crafted these cards and I made a copy, and then I got these cards with 3 questions per topic. So you choose your topic and then you'd have 3 different questions. So I came up with an idea of 3 rounds. So the physical aspect of the design of the game led to the idea of 3 rounds. And once I got the physical cards and started playing with people, the game sort of developed really fast from there. And a friend of mine who's really into game design said, the thing about this game, it's not the trivia, it's the meta game. It's the stealing. It's the interaction. It's the strategy. like, who are you going to ask the questions of? And so it ends up being a game that no longer feels like I'm inventing it as much as uncovering it. And so you have these two clues, which came up with 20 years ago, and then stealing, which I came up with a year ago. And I realized a month ago that having two clues and being able to steal in the middle of the clue is perfect, because if you know the first clue, which is always a little bit harder, then you can steal the card. And the fact that there's two clues and stealing sort of works out perfectly. And I like to take credit for having this brilliant, but it really feels like I'm discovering something that already existed, even though it is a complete invention. I don't feel like I can take credit for it.
Well, you should take credit for it, because even if you didn't invent it, which you did, you brought it to life. And so 100% you should take credit for that. I love it. Like I said, it's super dope. And the only reason that I jumped in on the second Kickstarter is because I got to play the game from being part of the first Kickstarter. And I got to play that game with my kids and my wife. And we had so much fun playing that game. After the first time we played that game, I was angry at myself that I only kickstarted for one copy, because I wanted to be able to give it to my kids, you know? And then you did a second Kickstarter, and I was so excited. So I immediately jumped on.
Hey, Streetwalkers, here's a word from our sponsors.
Hey, guys. If you're like me, quarantine or not, you and your family are looking for new things to do together that don't involve staring at a screen. I have the perfect solution. It's a new trivia game called You Know It, and it's a blast, and you can try it for free. You Know It was created by John Sylvain, one of the hosts of the Nooner podcast on Kevin Smith's Smodcast podcast network. And since I'm a fan of that podcast, I signed up for an early copy when John launched his Kickstarter campaign. Really, I just wanted to be supportive, but my family and I played the game, and we loved it. Days later, everybody kept saying how fun it was. It's a very simple game. The rules are even simpler than Trivial Pursuit, but there's a lot of strategy to it as well, and the questions are fun and interesting and sometimes hilarious. And all of the questions have two parts, so maybe you don't know the first part, but maybe you know the second part, or vice versa, like this one. What name is shared by a California NBA team and a California NHL team? The Kings. They're not all easy like that, but some of them are. There's wild cards and strategy and stealing and even consequences for getting an answer wrong. One of my favorite parts about this game is that there's 3 questions on each card, 3 rounds plus maybe a tiebreaker for each game. Like when me and my family played, there was 4 of us, and it took 45 minutes to an hour. And we only used 6 cards, and there's so many cards. We could play this game forever. Now, I'm not suggesting that you have to be drinking to play this game, but me and my family were, and I tell you what, it raises the fun level to 11. I highly recommend you try it, and you can do that for free by going to youknowitthegame.com, all one word, no spaces, and you can download and print a starter pack for free. There's also more cards available for science and sports, and even a special Generation Z pack. And if free isn't cheap enough for you, Streetwalkers can get 30% off on all other downloadable packs by using the discount code FSTREET at checkout. Once again, that's youknowitthegame.com, all one word, no spaces, and use the discount code FSTREET at checkout for 30% off all other downloadable packs. And if I'm being honest, Streetwalkers, I'm a little upset that I only got 1 copy of this game. My kids are adults, and they deserve a copy of this game so they can play with their friends too. Remember, the game is called You Know It, and it's a blast.
Let's get back into it.
Well, the great thing about this next version, every single card has got a unique number on the back. So the cards basically have 3 questions, and on the back is a topic like sports or technology or something like that. And it's, you know, the first version that you got, what are there, 6 or 8 topics, right? And I realized for this new version that you don't need to have just 6 or 8 topics. You can have as many topics as you want. But I tried to make it so that every topic has at least 2 cards, so you don't know what the questions are going to be when you see the topic. That's why there's not unlimited number of topics like there are with the game show. But every single card has got a number on it, and the numbers are sort of scattered throughout the topics, so that if you have a box and I have a box, we can get together even on the phone and with somebody else who's got the same box and say, okay, we're going to play with cards 9 through 14. Okay, I've got 9 through 14. So I'm looking at sports, history, new music. Okay, great. So we all have the same topic. So now we can play online without being physically together with the same cards. So that'll give people the ability to play remotely, even on Zoom, or on the phone, or whatever, which is going to be, I think, really helpful and fun in COVID,
Yeah, no kidding.
Within lockdown. So hopefully that's going to work out really good. And then, so I'm going to send out the downloadables. You're going to get a downloadable. You can print it out. You can call your kids and have them print it out and then play remotely.
I love it.
So all of this is going to be available when you hear this. So just go to youknowitthegame.com and you'll be able to buy your copies, and you can buy an extra copy for friends, send it out to them, and then when they get their copy, or you can do the downloadable, which will be on the same thing, which will be either free or like $1. It's going to be great.
Very exciting. Now, also, I believe that it is once a week. I'm guessing on Thursdays you do a game show version of this game, You Know It, the Game Show, on YouTube, right?
Yep, that's right. So if you go to youtube.com/YouKnowItTheGame, then you'll find all the episodes. And we've had, Paul Giamatti and Ahmed Best, who played Jar Jar Binks. That was really fun. One of the Try Guys, who are, a group of YouTubers. We did a recent episode with you and the other Nooner Merps were on there, and that was great. That was a huge amount of fun, and it's just been great. I really love doing it. It's a lot of fun.
Well, it is a lot of fun to not only participate in, and thank you for letting me do that, but it was a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun just to watch that show. And like you said, when you have multiple people, like for instance, on the game show, there's 4 people. Like you said, it's not only about the actual questions, it's about the gameplay. And I think that's one of the things that makes it a lot of fun. Plus, it sort of puts you in the mindset to joke around with each other. Like, it's not, oh, I got to win this game. I got to get this card. I got to get this point. It's, I'm going to have fun while I'm playing this game, because it just sort of puts you in that mindset of playfulness.
I'm really glad that worked out. And I'll tell you, I'm a trivia buff. I've never lost a game of Trivial Pursuit. One of the problems with trivia games is it's hard to get other people who aren't good at trivia to play. But this game, you can win even if you don't know all the answers. And I also try and make it so that there's questions which is difficult as a 50-something, to try and come up with questions that, teenagers will be able to answer. And the interesting thing is that those questions I can't answer. Like, I now know who David Dobrik is, or Charlie DeMello, or Melia, or whatever her name is, right? I know who they are because I'm providing trivia questions for young people. I don't know any of that stuff. It's very funny. We have a very balkanized culture, so it becomes harder and harder to write trivia.
Yeah, I bet. Well, John, as we're heading out, I know that I've taken up a great deal of your time today, and I appreciate that. Can you tell everybody where they can find you on social media?
Well, I guess I would say go to youknowitthegame.com and YouTube, You Know It, the Game. It's also on Facebook. I'm on Twitter at Sylvain BBB. And you can find me on Facebook, but I don't know if that makes any sense. I don't do any Instagram. I'm old. I don't understand it.
No worries. In addition to that, folks, you can find John Sylvain every week on the Nooner Podcast, which is available everywhere.
That's right.
It's a lot of fun, and every host of that show has now been on my show. So thank you kindly. I got the whole set.
Yeah, there you go. The full set.
I even have previous hosts. Also, real quick, we didn't really get a chance to talk about it because we kind of ran out of time, but John did write at least 2, maybe there's more coming, but he wrote some science fiction books.
Oh, yeah.
He wrote The Space Elevator and The Space Academy. Those are both on Amazon. And there will be a link to his Amazon author page in the show notes of this episode. While obviously I have not read them, because I would talk about them greatly had I read them, I have not. But I have heard you speak about what these books are about. And I will say that it is some very intriguing ideas, particularly the space elevator one. Those are some pretty good ideas. I will be getting those books. I just have not yet for whatever reason, probably because I'm lazy. I am going to get those, and I'm going to check those out. Are there audiobooks of those available?
No, not yet. But the last book is done. It's called The Space Marine. It's the last book in the trilogy.
Oh, very cool. Oh, I'm excited for that, too. Maybe I'll just wait and then buy all three. I'll buy the whole set.
Yeah.
John, is there anything that we didn't talk about or I didn't ask you about that you wanted to talk about today?
No. I think, I really want to echo what you said about small theater being a wonderful thing. I have a lot of friends in theater. I was joking with Amina Kaplan, who was on The Game show with Paul Giamatti. She is an amazingly talented person, and she's the resident director of Lion King on Broadway right now, which means basically she would be, if it was on, she'd be watching it and making sure that it's still working out. And she's like, what are we going to do? And I told her, theater's been dying for 6,000 years. This is not going to kill it, but it is wounding it very seriously. I mean, theater gets by on a tiny little margin. And I'm on the board of the theater I started in Los Angeles called Sacred Fools Theater. And it's surviving, but theater's going to have to reinvent itself. And it's going to need support from everybody. So go out and support your small theaters. Go out as soon as you can and get with other people. I am sure that someday we're going to be able to get out and gather together safely. And even in the meantime, get out and gather together safely, be as distant as possible so you don't spread COVID. Don't go out to bars and lick people.
No licking. You hear that, streetwalkers? No licking.
Anyway, no licking, but go see theater as soon as you can. Go see live events. I think human beings need that. And find ways to support local arts organizations. They are really, really hurting. I know a lot of places are hurting, restaurants as well, but I think if there's something that you can do to support the theater artists in your town or arts organizations locally, I encourage you to do that.
Well said, and a great note to go out on. John Sylvain, thank you so much, man. You have a great rest of your weekend.
Thanks so much, Steve. I really appreciate all your support for It and for Nooner.
Ah, my pleasure. It's all out of selfishness, I promise. It's just because I love those things so much. All right. You have a great weekend, John.
All right. Thanks, Steve.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
As always, thanks for listening, Streetwalkers. And don't forget, follow the show on Twitter at FascinationSTPD, on Instagram at Fascination Street Pod. Follow the podcast page on Facebook at Fascination Street Podcast. And of course, you can always email me at fascinationstreetpod@gmail.com. And if you haven't already, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button and rate us on iTunes. Opening music is the song Magnolia from the 2014 album Intransigence, used with permission from Douglas Miles Clark. Closing music is Apollo from the 2001 album Into the Known by the band Sapphire. Thanks for hanging out with us and getting to know a little bit about our guest. We'll see you next time on Fascination Street.